Hello and welcome to class 18. In this class, we're starting a new section about arguing with sources. In this section, we try to investigate the relationship between the argument and the person giving the argument, and how to think critically about both of those. In today's class, we are going to look at arguments from authority, sometimes called arguments from testimony. These are situations where you are asked to believe something on someone's say-so. You're supposed to believe it just because they said it. So this is a situation where it is important to consider the reliability of the person you are supposed to trust. Later, we are going to look at situations where you shouldn't consider who the person is. You should just consider the argument that they are making. If you do consider the person, you are committing what is called the ad hominem fallacy. We will cover those in class 21. So just to emphasize, this is the basic message of the whole module. Sometimes we are asked to believe something on someone's say-so. A common example of this would just be like if your friend tells you you got in a car crash and you believe your friend because they told you and they're your friend. This also happens with expert testimony. If the doctor says you have cancer, you believe you have cancer, and in situations like this, we need to evaluate the source because the reason you are believing the conclusion of the argument is essentially because of the source. Right? So sometimes we are asked to believe something on someone's say-so, and when this happens, we need to evaluate the source. Other times, we are asked to believe something on independent evidence, and the person presenting the evidence is not relevant. When this happens, we need to set aside the person and look at the evidence. In today's class, we are talking about the former situation, where we are asked to believe something on someone's say-so. We are talking then about an argument from authority. An argument from authority is an inductive argument that claims a proposition is true because it has been asserted by a person in a position to know. Note that this is an inductive argument, meaning that it does not prove the conclusion with absolute certainty. At best, the conclusion will be likely. Okay, one thing that's important to emphasize is that most of what we believe because someone told us so. The example I use in the textbook is the basic idea that water is H2O. Most of you probably know that water is H2O, and probably you remember from high school chemistry that this means that that water is composed of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. But very few of you have actually recreated Henry Cavendish's late 18th century experiment where he proved that water was H2O by combining 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen to make water. We just take it for granted that this is true because we were told it in science class. This is true for all sorts of things. How do we know that the Earth is round? Very few students have probably actually circumnavigated the globe. Although sometimes I get military students who've done that as a part of their duty, just wound up going everywhere around the world. For the most part, we know that the Earth is round because we were told so. Of course, we can see pictures of the Earth from outer space, but even then, we rely on authority to tell us that what we're looking at really is a picture of Earth from space. And for that matter, we rely on authority if we travel around the world to let us know that the places we're going are the places that we say we're going. So the idea of having to rely on someone else's say-so to form good beliefs is deeply woven into the fabric of knowledge. The 2 most common kinds of arguments from authority that we're going to be looking at are expert testimony and eyewitness testimony. So sometimes you believe someone because they're an expert. Sometimes their expertise is actually just the fact that they were there and they saw it. So if there's an eyewitness to a murder, they count as an authority because the fact that they're an eyewitness makes them an authority. Okay, so we said previously that the different kinds of argument we're going to be looking at each come with an argumentation scheme. These are styles of evidence, styles of argument with established virtues and drawbacks, and a set of critical questions that we ask in reply when we're given these arguments. And the critical questions are questions that can be asked of any argument that matches an argumentation scheme to know to see if the argumentation is any good. So this is the argumentation scheme for arguments from authority. It's actually really simple. T1, person A said X, Y, Z. Conclusion, X, Y, Z. So basically, a person says something, and then we believe that that thing is true. We drop the phrase is true from the argument when we write it in standard form. Often there's an additional premise, sometimes it's just implicit in here, P2, this person is a reliable authority in this context. Okay, so for instance, your high school chemistry teacher tells you water is H2O. That is a premise. The conclusion, water actually is H2O. We take out words like really and actually or is true, and we just say, the thing that the other person said when we write it in standard form. That means, so the conclusion here really means that water is made out of 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Then the additional premise that may or may not be stated explicitly is that the person who made the original statement is a reliable authority. In this context, that means that your high school chemistry teacher is in fact a reliable authority on basic chemistry, and hopefully they are. So the other kind of argument from authority that we're going to be looking at is eyewitness testimony. And sometimes when I teach this class, I use an old movie called 12 Angry Men, which is about a jury in a murder trial. And in that trial, there are plenty of examples of arguments from eyewitness testimony. So this is one of the jurors in the movie. He's just known as juror number 3. He's repeating the testimony he hears in court. The old man testified, I heard the defendant shout, I'm going to kill you. I heard the body hit the floor, and I saw the defendant running away. From that, we can draw this conclusion. The defendant really did shout, I'm going to kill you, and then ran away right after the body hit the floor. So there are two arguments going on here. First is just that the thing that the old man heard really did happen. And then the second argument after that is that if that happened, he's the murderer, right? So this guy's not an eyewitness testimony. He's an ear witness testimony. All he did is hear, I'm going to kill you, and then the sound of the body hitting the floor. If he is a good source for the existence of those two noises, we can then infer from a second argument that the defendant is guilty. So, right, that's an example of an argument from authority that's a kind of eyewitness testimony, as opposed to the kind of argument from authority that's based on expert testimony. Okay, so we've got critical questions. Now, some critical questions can be asked of any argument, and others only go with certain forms of argument. And we said in class 8 that the critical questions that go with any argument are the premises true, or at least plausible? Do the premises support the conclusion? And has any relevant information been omitted from the premises? So for this first one, when we're talking about arguments from authority, the question then becomes, did the person really say this thing? So here you're just checking to see that, like I said, the person said the thing. And this is important. There are a lot of scams out there based on people impersonating other people. So this is the the Federal Trade Commission's website on uh, helping people identify scams. They say, warning, scammers impersonate celebrities on social media, right? And like during the big bubble for NFTs, you got, which were like Beanie Babies for computer nerds. You got a lot of people pretending to be celebrities online and then telling you to buy a certain product because it will increase in value. And not only is that a bad argument from authority, the person wasn't even really real, right? Um, so that's the first question you should ask when you get an argument from authority. Did the person really say that? The other thing we want to ask is, do the premises support the conclusion? In the context of an argument from authority, this turns into two of our short list of critical questions for that style of argument. Is the person in a position to know? And is the person unbiased? So those are the two basic questions you ask if you're given an argument from authority and you want to know whether the premises support the conclusion. You also want to know if any relevant information has been omitted. And in this context, the relevant question is this proposition confirmed by other experts? If the doctor tells you you have cancer, you get a second opinion from another doctor. If there's an eyewitness who says that there's a murder, maybe you go looking for another witness, which there is in the murder in the 12 Angry Men movie that we watch sometimes in this course. So this is a short list of questions, critical questions that should be asked whenever you are evaluating an argument from authority. Is the person in a position to know? Is the person biased? Is the proposition confirmed by other experts? So this short list is what I wanted you to use in the first problem set. And there's a longer list actually that I want people to use in more complicated situations involving expert testimony. First, let's just look at how to use this short list. Okay, so this first set of problems is short arguments from authority, and you just want to use the short list of questions for them. Is this person in a position to know? Is this person biased? Is what they're saying confirmed by other experts or people in a position to know? And the first three problems are all essentially variations on the same argument. And there's some subtleties here about how changing wording can change the strength of an argument or not. And also how people leave out different parts of an argument or phrase things in ways that sort of hide the argument structure. So actually, let's just start looking at the first one of these. And we'll get this. My hairstylist told me that honey speeds up your metabolism. So, honey is good for you. Right? This seems straightforwardly enough like it's an argument from an inappropriate authority. Your hairstylist is not a nutritionist, right? One thing to note here, though, is that there are actually two arguments embedded. First, you have to go from, here, let me just pull this up. First, you have to go from, my hairstylist says that honey speeds up your metabolism, to the conclusion that honey speeds up your metabolism. Then after that, you need to go from honey speeds up your metabolism to honey is good for you, right? So the important thing to see about the first argument is that that is the one that is in line with the argumentation scheme for argument by authority. An authority said something, so it's true. There's just this additional little jump between what the authority said is true and what the person actually wants to do. Okay. So again, I said that this is an obvious case of an unreliable source. I don't know why it's doing this here. I'm trying to have a slow reveal here just while working in a Word document, and it's not exactly working out. Okay, so this is an obvious case of an unreliable source. Nevertheless, the world is full of people who get health advice from friends and acquaintances. And generally, their friends are just repeating something they read in some magazine, right? Okay, so let's see how our 3-question test applies here. Is the hairdresser in a position to know? No, they are not a nutritionist or a doctor or a health expert. Is the hairdresser biased? Well, it's reasonable to assume he's not getting money from the Honey Marketing Board, right? So he's doing badly on the first question and okay on the second question. Is this consistent with the judgment of other experts? I've never heard it before, maybe. Another thing that's worth noting is that the leap in the second argument from honey speeds up your metabolism to honey is good for you is suspect, right? It's based on this assumption that speeding up your metabolism is always good. And that probably has some fat phobic bias behind it. Like, of course, everyone always wants to be thinner. So on the whole, the source is not remotely reliable and the argument is weak. Okay, for the next one, we change the source. I read in US News and World Report that honey speeds up your metabolism, so it is good for you. I don't know if anyone reads US News and World Report these days. Back in the days of paper magazines, it was quite popular. But in any case, just treat it like a popular news magazine. So now the question is this a good argument? And again, the thing to note here is that it's got the same structure. It's just appealing directly to the source that previously the hairdresser had used. So again, it's got this 2-stage structure. U.S. News and World Report says honey speeds up your metabolism, therefore it speeds up your metabolism. If it speeds up your metabolism, it must be good for you. And the thing to see here is that this argument is more reliable. You're going to your source's source. That's a little bit better. But it's still not science. To do the real to have a real authority, you need to go to the original scientific research or an actual scientist. Okay, so is the source in a position to know? Well, the source is probably a reporter who covers the science medicine beat regularly, which means that they're a bit more of an expert than your hairdresser. But again, she's not a doctor, they are not a doctor or a scientist. Is the source biased? Probably a little, yeah. Magazines like to keep advertisers happy. Also, a common source for journalists is press releases that put out biased science, right? So it's actually easy to manipulate science journalists with phony scientists. And this could come from something like the Honey Marketing Board, which I just made up, but they're more serious versions of that. The Tobacco Institute forever issued fake science that then influenced science journalists. Is the judgment consistent with other expert judgments? Again, I've never heard anyone talking about honey speeding up your metabolism before. Okay, so on the whole, the source is still not reliable. This is a little bit better, but it's not great. Okay, variation number 3. The New York Times reports that honey is good for you. It speeds up your metabolism. So there might be you might be focusing on the change of authority from a news magazine you haven't heard of to a newspaper that's still quite prominent. I want to highlight the difference in structure first, right? For starters, in this argument, essentially the conclusion is now implicit, right? At no point does the speaker say directly, honey is good for you. But that's still the obvious conclusion that they're trying to give. Instead, what they're doing is they're giving the argument from authority and then this other fact that they also read in the same article, which essentially amounts to the authority figure explaining a little bit of their argument. And in the full version, the 6-question version of the test for argument by authority, I do emphasize that good authorities explain their reasoning. So there's a touch of that there that makes it a little bit better. But again, let's look at the structure. There are probably different ways you can break this down, but the important thing to see here is that the conclusion that honey is good for you is now implicit. But you can say, basically, the New York Times is making two assertions. Honey speeds up your metabolism, honey is good for you. And you can spread those out into a couple arguments, right? So is this better? I actually don't think it's much better. I know I just said that good authorities explain their arguments, but there really isn't much explanation here. And for my money, the New York Times is not as reliable as people think it is, even for things like science. So, uh, so yeah. Okay, now this next one is getting off into different territory. You've got a dialogue between two people. One of them says he's voting for Labour. And Labour, by the way, is the UK equivalent of the Democratic Party. Some of these examples are international. And then when he explains why he's voting Labour, he just says, my parents have always voted Labour, so I guess I will too. So one thing that's worth noting is that people don't actually say this, right? I mean, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I vote the way my parents vote because they vote that way. Nevertheless, it's what people do. People inherit their political beliefs the same way they inherit their religion. And it's not actually, it is a form of argument from authority, but it's generally operating more unconsciously, right? So in any case, does it make sense for a critical thinker to just accept the political opinions of their parents? No, it doesn't. So the argument looks like this: my parents voted Labor, so I should vote Labor, right? It's not quite. It's the same basic format as the scheme. Argumentation scheme for argument from authority. Person says this, therefore this is true. It's just now done with an action, voting for Labor. All right. So is the person in a position to know? Well, I mean, no more than any other citizen in a democracy, right? This is a made-up example. We don't know anything about these people or this person or their parents, but by default, we can say that everyone is a little bit of an authority. And again, are they biased? Well, probably no more than any other citizen in a democracy. So this isn't a particularly good authority in that it's just as good as any random person on the street. This last question becomes a little weird when you think about it, for this argument. So the last question is the judgment consistent with the judgment of other experts? Well, I mean, honestly, I think one of the basic principles of democracy is that there are no real experts. People have to decide their own lives for themselves. And you're better off making your own mistakes than having someone else's successes. So, yeah, I think the argument is, on the whole, unreliable. All right. So here's another one that isn't quite something people say all the time, but it comes out in the way people think. Miley Cyrus says Walmart is a great place to shop, so I bet it's a great place to shop. Structure is just going to be going to be P1. Miley Cyrus says this, therefore it's true. Again, people typically don't say this explicitly, unless maybe they're following an Instagram person that they feel like they have a special relationship with, even though they don't. Um, but what can we say about evaluating it? Is the source in a position to know? Well, what do celebrity children know about wealthy celebrities who are children of wealthy celebrities know about discount shopping? Is the source biased? She's a paid sponsor, right? So um, is it unreliable source? Is the judgment consistent with other expert judgments? Unlikely. It's interesting to ask who would be an expert judgment here. Consumer Reports provides reliable information about this sort of thing. But again, I don't think that they're going to just repeat. They're not going to just repeat. Walmart's a great place to shop. Okay, so on the whole, we have another poor argument. Okay, so I'm going to skip to the last problem here. You can look up the other answers on the answer sheet. Here's another beauty product one. This time we're going back to the 1950s with an endorsement from Betty Grable, star of Farmer Takes a Wife. And also it mentions, what is the line? America's most glamorous women. So now we kind of have two authority figures, Betty Grable and a another and just sort of this vague thing, you know, glamorous women. The argument structure stays the same. You now have two authorities saying you should do something, therefore you should do it. So is the source in a position to know? Well, my take is that professionally beautiful people know something generally about beauty products, but not as much as the people they hire to do their hair and makeup. Is the source biased? Yes, she is a paid spokesperson. That alone should sort of end the idea that she is a reliable authority. Is the judgment consistent with other expert judgments? Again, if you think that the real experts here are professional hair and makeup people, we really don't know. Okay. I also asked you to evaluate the emotions evoked by this, and we haven't been talking in detail about methods for evaluating emotion in argument, but I'm just going to do some common sense things and reiterate the importance of meta-knowledge. So the argument here appeals to emotions like admiration and desire. I admire you, I want to be like you. It also promises emotional satisfaction if you believe the conclusion and buy the product. Um, Once you become aware of these emotions, I think you would have a sense that this isn't a good case. This isn't a good time to trust your gut. And again, I emphasize in this course that critical thinking is not unemotional thinking. Critical thinking is thinking that is aware of your emotions and taking into account when they are reliable and when they are unreliable. Okay, those were passages you were meant to analyze using the shorter list of critical questions for arguments from authority. There is also a longer list that adds 3 more questions, which I recommend using for more important situations, including situations of expert testimony. So I'm going to cut to a video where I run through the longer list, explain the new item, and then demonstrate it using the example of Dr. Amy Acton, the former director of the Ohio Department of Public Health and an important figure in the early days of the COVID outbreak.
So the first three questions are the same. Are they an expert in the relevant area? Are they unbiased? Is it confirmed by other experts? Additional questions. Is the source speaking in a context that affects their credibility? This is an important one that rarely gets asked, but I think it's vital, actually. Sometimes when you speak, there are real consequences for you if you are lying or mistaken. Sworn testimony in a court of law, it passes this question to the with flying colors, right? When someone testifies to something in a court of law, you can count on that testimony being accurate. You can count on it more than other contexts because there are such severe penalties for lying. You can go to jail, right? And you see in all sorts of situations where people who previously have been lying up a storm, when put under oath, just shut up, because they know there will be consequences. So I think of this as a scale of consequences. On the one hand, the most reliable person is going to be someone who's, for instance, testifying under oath. The least reliable person is going to be an anonymous voice on the internet that you will never see again. I used to use people shooting off their mouth at a bar, but I actually think anonymous internet voices are even less reliable because there is zero accountability there. That person might be using a burner account, right? So that whole identity is going to go away, and there will never be any penalties for not telling the truth. So, is the person speaking in a context that affects their credibility? Are they under oath? Are they anonymous on the internet? Does the source offer justifications for their claim? I think this is a fascinating one, and it's one I use a lot when I'm thinking about how much I trust someone who's presenting themselves as an authority figure. A good authority figure will do the best they can to walk you through their process of reaching a conclusion. So if you go to a doctor and the doctor says, you have a tumor, a mild cancer, it's not very aggressive, but it's something to be worried about, they're going to walk you through the evidence that they have. They're going to show you the x-rays or the CT scans. They're going to show you the blood work. You could, if you wanted, go home and start doing internet research and following up all the terms they use to get more detail. And, you can understand how they reached their conclusion. A bad authority figure is one that doesn't want you to see their reasoning. That says, don't look at the man behind the curtain. It says, I got this as a direct revelation from God, and then God disappeared. There's no more evidence of this. God told me to write this down, and now this is all there is. And there's no way to check them, right? If their authority is based on something completely unknowable to you, that is sketchy, right? And then finally, there's what I think of called the Hume test, based on the philosopher David Hume. Is the claim believable based on everything else we know? David Hume presented this argument about miracles. He said, And here he's talking, not about like, oh, the birth of every child is a miracle, meaning simply like it feels like something that's wonderful. But miracle is literally something that breaks the ordinary laws of physics, or is incredibly unlikely, like miracle cures, laying hands on someone and having their sight restored, or something like that. So Hume says, whenever you're in these situations, ask yourself which is more likely, that this person is lying or confused, or that this statistically unlikely event actually happened. And then when you're talking about miracles, by definition, you're talking about something that is not likely to happen. So whenever someone says, for instance, I can heal you with my psychic powers, you can ask yourself, which is more common? People who have psychic powers to heal you, or people who lie? Right? Okay. I want to run through this using the example of Dr. Amy Acton, who told us early on in the pandemic to wear a mask. Amy Acton was you may remember from her from early in the pandemic. She was the head of the Ohio Department of Public Health and a key advisor to Governor DeWine on early pandemic policy. So she says you should wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID. Here's what we need to ask ourselves. Is she in a position to know? Is she unbiased? Is she backed by other sources? Is she speaking in a context that increases credibility? Can they justify their claims? And do they fit with what we already know? So here I'm asking these questions. These questions then become premises, essentially, in implicit premises in the argument. And we can start filling them in. Look, Dr. Acton is a medical doctor and director of public health for Ohio, meaning she has the relevant expertise. She is in a position to know. Is she unbiased? Oh, I got two at once there. I didn't mean to do that. No, well, she's not paid by outside public interests, so there's a straightforward way that she's unbiased. It's not like she's hawking a miracle cure like chloroquine and will also make money by selling that cure. She's not in the pocket of Big Mask. She does have a certain set of professional training, and that affects her worldview. But nothing in the professional training of a public health expert makes me think that would bias them in some way. And the other thing, right, is every other public health expert in the country was saying the exact same thing. So we get all this confirmation on the first three. What else can we say? She's speaking in a context that affects their credibility. Government officials lose their jobs and doctors lose their licenses if they lie in a big public fashion like this. It would be really bad for her if she were not telling the truth. Dr. Acton and other public health experts did their best to explain public pandemic modeling. We started to learn a lot about, how lethal something is versus how readily it's transmitted, surface transmission versus aerosol transmission versus respiratory droplets. And there was even more information available if you wanted to dig down on it. She was always as transparent as possible. And look, her claims fit with what we already know. This outbreak followed the exact pattern of the 1918 flu pandemic. This is familiar business. So all of this says that Dr. Acton was a reliable source.
Okay, I want to close out by pointing out a common mistake that I see sometimes. What happens is once students are introduced to the idea of an argument from authority, they just sort of constantly um, evaluate authority um, and treat every argument like it's an argument from authority. But not every argument is an argument from authority. For instance, an argument that is given by an authority figure is not necessarily an argument from authority. In an argument from authority, the fact that an authority believes something is presented as evidence for why the audience should also believe that thing. So imagine two scenarios. Pope Benedict XVI is giving a sermon, and he says, all people are mortal, Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is an argument given by an authority figure, but it's not an argument from authority. He is not citing his own authority here, he's just using logic. On the other hand, if Gary the hairdresser is chatting with a customer and he says, the Pope says that birth control is a sin, therefore it must be a sin, this is an argument from authority. Gary isn't the authority, but he is citing the authority of the Pope as a reason why you should believe birth control is a sin. Similarly, an argument about an authority figure is not necessarily an argument from authority, right? So Pope Benedict XVI is 85 years old. This was a while ago. People over 80 generally have some health problems. Therefore, the Pope probably has some health problems. This is not an argument from authority. This is an argument about an authority. On the other hand, Steve the plumber is chatting with a customer, and he says Stephen Hawking says that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. Therefore, the universe is probably expanding at an accelerating rate. This is an argument from authority. Steve isn't the authority, but he is citing an authority figure, a physicist, in an issue about physics. So, just to summarize, in an argument from authority, the fact that an authority believes something is presented as a reason why the audience should also believe that thing. Okay, you've got one more exercise that asks you to use the long list of questions, critical questions for argument from authority. I'm not going to run through that in the video. The answer sheet will be posted online.